Mind, I'm Austin,
I am Duncan.
and Bryce is not here today, but Bryce? All right, so today,
Or is he?
right, is he? We'll never know. We really do need to find the original sound clip for that so people don't think we're just nuts.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about Saudi Arabia.
Oh
Uh,
boy.
Most of you probably just got really angry if you lean to the right, because the Middle East, not our favorite place, except we love to be there. So, let's just go ahead and talk about one of the most influential people in Saudi Arabia right now, the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. He is only 32 years old, but he's next in line for the throne because they're an unelected monarchy. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You are quite correct. Now, with that said, his father, Salman bin Abdulaziz, only came to the throne a couple of years ago, and his predecessor, Mohammed bin Salman's predecessor as Crown Prince, was actually a son of his predecessor, or one of his predecessors, I'm sorry, named Mohammed bin Naif. And Mohammed bin Naif was ejected as Crown Prince, I believe, early this year or late last, if I recall correctly.
And bin Salman has not been quiet.
Not at all, no.
For how fast Saudi Arabia has changed in the past, he's going blazingly fast.
Yeah, actually, he's really using the fact that Salman was regarded prior to the time that he came to the throne as being a little senile, a little bit of sort of the slow member of the family. Now, honestly, I think that was probably a misappraisal of the man. Upon coming to the throne, he very presciently, from his country's position, continued the oil glut. He made a series of, fairly astute decisions regarding the family's oil business, that sort of thing, at a time that it was very influential and lowered oil prices pretty much permanently.
Not only that, but he also came up with a vision for his country.
Correct.
The Salman Vision 2030, I think he calls it.
Correct. Although
Yeah.
how much of that is actually driven by King Salman and how much of it is driven by Mohammed bin Salman, no one really knows, because of the two of them, Salman is, in the traditional sense, the more conservative of the two, although he still seems to be a forward-thinking person.
He's very popular with the 25 and under group,
yeah,
which is the majority of the country, actually.
Right.
I did not realize that before.
Yeah, it's actually a very young
this.
country. Now, Mohammed bin Salman is actually quite a bit more, and I know that this word doesn't really mean quite the same in the context of Saudi Arabia as it does here,
Right.
but a bit more progressive. Certainly someone
Not
who...
Bernie progressive.
Not Bernie progressive, classical liberal progressive. So, I mean, for example, he's heavily suggested and very much supported the idea of easing some of the country's restrictions when it comes to religious law. He has stayed pretty much on the right side of the Wahhabi clerics so far, and that's something we'll get to in a minute when discussing the corruption charges that are being brought against.
As Saturday Night Live reminded us, he allowed women to drive just 2 short years after cars could by themselves. So, forward thinking for Saudi Arabia.
Well, again, we're talking about a country that has been under a very theocratic regime for the last roughly century.
I mean, when he said, religious police, that's red flags right there.
Right. And, the Al Saud have been very much so enamored with the concept of sort of a religious monarchy. Most of Saudi Arabian law is to some degree based on Muslim religious tradition, at least that of it which pertains to, say, everyday social interactions, that sort of thing. Less so in the business sense because, of course, that's more of a modern context.
Right, but it's funny when you think about that because when you look at religious texts, they're usually a little more forgiving than actual law. In some sense.
The Quran is not always super forgiving about
it.
it.
I was looking at the Bible more. I know there's a verse in there that says if someone owes you money after 7 years, it's gone. It's the debt's forgiven.
Right.
That's what I was thinking.
Sure.
So again, I'm not a student. I don't study the Quran.
Right. And Muslim religious tradition is one of those things that it's very interesting. It attaches quite a lot of importance specifically to the proper observance of Islam. That's what a very huge portion of the Quran is actually dedicated to. Actually, one of their, I think it's from the Hadith, which is sort of a basically a supplementary scripture to the Quran. It's attached less importance than the Quran itself, but it's also considered a major theological work, in that their cardinal sins, the sort of their equivalent of the 7 deadly sins in Christianity, are laid out. And actually pretty much number one is equating anybody with Allah. So, I mean, worshiping any other god, or worshiping a person as if he or she were a god.
So basically, you
so
shall have
again,
no other god before me.
Right, very similar, but with a lot more emphasis on it as a concept. So again, the orthodox practice of Islam is very much enshrined in the day-to-day, not only just the legal system, but the societal structure of Saudi Arabia in general. And that's something that within the acceptable limits of that society as it currently exists, Mohammed bin Salman is looking to sort of ease restrictions. Which is always
good for business.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is he wants to ease restrictions largely because he's looking at diversifying the economy. The last couple of years have been very rough on Saudi Arabia. The oil glut, which ironically they caused, has not been kind to them for the first time in a very long time. They've actually had to take on some sovereign debt now. Luckily for them, they are incredibly wealthy, and the sovereign debt does not carry a very high interest rate. Everyone knows they're going to repay. But the Saud having to take on major debt of any kind is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, I don't... Have they ever had to before?
I think they did have to back in the 1970s or 1980s. There were a couple of oil downturns. And I think in one of those, they did have to take on some debt. I don't know exactly how much.
Which is insane, because they have the richest man in the world in Saudi Arabia, I'm pretty sure.
Right.
That's
and
the king,
and the
right?
Al Saud are collectively the richest family in the world, of course.
Wow. Venezuela could have the same thing, but we just had to name drop our favorite country.
Yeah.
Right, Duncan? Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about why we're actually bringing Saudi Arabia up. Again, it has to do with Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince. He has been making some serious moves.
Correct.
He was just named the head of an anti-corruption task force.
Mm-hmm.
Hours after that, 11 of the insanely rich princes were arrested.
Correct.
And I think there were as much as 320 cases of anti-corruption.
Something like that.
But a lot of them have already been pardoned, I think.
Right. Now, quite a few current ministers who weren't, they probably actually are members of the Al Saud family, but who were not princes in and of themselves, were swept up in this. I read a very large number of ex-ministers of different departments, etc., had been swept up in this. And what's most interesting is that the rumors have, now this is currently unsubstantiated, but sort of the scuttlebutt going around is that Mohammed bin Naif, who is, again, Mohammed bin Salman's predecessor as the crown prince of Saudi Arabia and therefore next in line to the throne, has also been swept up on corruption charges.
Really?
Again, that is unconfirmed. That was something that was kind of going around this morning. I have not heard anything more to either confirm that or repudiate it.
Right, but this has got quite the reaction on Twitter, which is actually the most popular social platform in Saudi Arabia, I found out doing research.
And actually substantial parts of the Middle East, actually even in during the Arab Spring revolutions, like the Tahrir Square protests and such.
Really?
It was pretty, it was pretty influential at that time.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Well, he's definitely bringing change. I think the West is going to misinterpret this, honestly. They're going to think, hey, they're being more progressive, but they're not being democratic about it. Not at all.
In the context of Saudi Arabian society, democracy is not something that's even on the table.
Right,
and again,
that's
we're
the
talking,
point.
If we look at it in historical context, that sort of makes sense. I mean, the Al Saud basically emerged in the aftermath of World War I, the British and French interventions in the Middle East after the Sykes-Picot Line had been drawn to subdivide up elements of the Middle East between the British and the French spheres of influence.
Can we just talk about how the British fucked up the whole world?
And more specifically, after Hashemite Arabs were installed in Iraq, sort of in the aftermath of all that, I mean, we're talking about an Arabia that was not very advanced at the time compared to the powers that it was dealing with, the Ottoman Turkish Empire at the time, the British Empire, France, and of course the Turks were actually on the side of Germany in World War I. So we're
Really?
So we're actually talking about several great powers that were sort of involved in this area at the time. And at the time, the Arabs at that point were not nearly as advanced, especially technologically, as several of the competing powers. So we're talking about a society that largely advanced by massive leaps and bounds in a very short period of time, largely through exposure.
Right.
And participation in World War I.
So,
and specifically, the rebellion, the Arab rebellion against the Ottoman Turkish Empire played a really huge role in that. So we're still talking about a society that is very much driven by tribal ties, by, again, Orthodox Islam, and that has never really had any kind of a democratic system. It's always been a tribal or monarchical system.
So that's like if you gave, let's say, Abraham Lincoln Wi-Fi, is what you're comparing this to?
Yeah, I mean, and again, it was a very fortunate thing for the Al Saud that about the time they came to power was when oil was really starting to have a massive
World
value
War I. That's right.
in the market. Well, again, the Al Saud came to power after World War I.
But World War II.
Right, and again...
Sorry, hard to say that it wasn't important 10 years after.
And again, that was really what made the kingdom as disproportionately wealthy as it has become at this point, and what's made the Al Saud one of the most powerful groups of people in the entire world. It was really quite fortunate for them, the timing of that.
Wasn't it funny how dumb luck could turn into fortune? But, all right, so let's just talk about this for a little minute. What does this mean for Mohammed bin Salman? Like, you just said his father came to power not too long ago.
Correct.
So why is he consolidating his power so quickly? Why doesn't he take the slow pace like traditionally his family has?
Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. Part of it is that the last few kings of Saudi Arabia have been very old men, traditionally kind of past the prime of their lives. The Al Saud tend to live quite a long time, owing...
Why?
Well, owing largely to really great medical care, of course. They can afford it. But yeah, it's been quite a long time since there was a younger, more vigorous prince on the throne. And the other thing is, he was sort of in a bad position starting off his father's reign. Because again, when Salman came to power, Mohammed bin Salman was not made the crown prince immediately. Mohammed bin Naif was still the crown prince and was only ousted later. So I think there are a couple of different things going on here. One, Mohammed bin Salman, and to a lesser extent his father, clearly have a very specific vision for the development of Saudi Arabia at this point, and there is going to need to be consolidated power for, Salman to begin that process, and more specifically for Mohammed bin Salman to complete it over his future reign. The other thing is, again, the Al Saud is a very large family. There are sort of different branches within it, specifically among the different families of the past crown princes.
So not unlike your European
not at all
politics back
unlike
in
the
day.
Habsburg monarchies.
Right.
Very
in
similar.
Germany?
Very similar in that regard.
Right.
So you have different political tides. You have people who support Mohammed bin Naif. You have people who support Mohammed bin Salman, although I'm guessing right now those are something of a commodity.
I'm sure that's going to change if he manages to get away with this successfully.
I think so, yeah.
So long term, what does this mean for Saudi Arabia?
A lot of that depends on how this goes. If Mohammed bin Salman does actually manage to get Saudi society liberalized somewhat in terms of easing restrictions, diversifying the economy and making it more attractive for outside capital investment, I think that right now he could be pretty much what Saudi Arabia needs in order to remain in its current relevant position, with oil prices that probably aren't going down anytime in the immediate future. By the same token, this is also one of those things that can go horribly wrong. The rest of the Al Saud family could turn against him. Salman could be pressured politically. Now, granted, being the absolute monarch of Saudi Arabia, he sort of has some privileges that aren't extended to everybody when it comes to picking his successor. But this is another one of those things that anything can happen in a succession crisis.
That's true. Just comes down to who manages to struggle it out.
Right, and I think right now, again, Salman's in good health, but he is, I couldn't tell you exactly how old he is, but he's definitely an older man. Mohammed bin Salman, at this point, I think is seeking to make sure that when Salman does pass, there isn't a succession crisis in which he could potentially be ousted. I think that's really what's going on here.
I mean, he was already in a strong position, but he wants to put himself in a
being crown prince, yes, he was already in a pretty good position.
But Naif had a good claim.
Right. And that's the thing, is in the aftermath of a royal death, pretty much anything can happen unless you've been very careful to secure your position beforehand, and I think that's exactly what we're seeing right now.
Right. So, anything else we need to talk about?
Probably wouldn't hurt to touch on Mansour bin Mukran.
The man that died in the...
Yeah.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, in what is either a very unusual move of political assassination or, to be perfectly honest, I think more likely, a very ill-timed coincidence. Another one of the Saudi princes was in a helicopter taking a tour near the Yemeni border. That helicopter crashed. It was actually Mansour bin Mukran, who is the son of Mukran bin Abdulaziz, who was a previous crown prince for a very brief period, I think between about July and maybe April 2015.
And if this is all confusing to you, welcome to Middle Eastern politics.
It's very Machiavellian. Family interplays and power struggles that go on, usually very much so behind the scenes.
Definitely. So, talked about all of it. He arrested quite a few people, 11 princes. That's pretty insane.
Right, and to be clear, I don't think that we're going to see executions out of this.
Definitely. Almost definitely not.
If there's
just
one thing
judging where they're staying.
Again, if there was one thing that was guaranteed to make the rest of the Al Saud turn against Mohammed bin Salman, it would be executing other members of the family. And again, that would be very dangerous for him because it would establish the precedent of members of the Al Saud executing other members of the Al Saud, which could not play out so well for him in the potential long-term future.
So, any closing statements?
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now Saudi Arabia is very much at a turning point. We're going to see over probably about the next 15 years where this country goes, whether it's going to be able to update itself to stay economically and politically relevant, or whether it's going to slowly lose its relevance. I don't think we're going to see, no matter how badly things go, I cannot imagine Saudi Arabia coming in for some sort of absolute crash. I would probably see it, in a worst-case scenario, fading off in importance over a very long period of time. But I think those are the stakes we're looking at.
I'll be interested to see whether or not this power play goes through, just because I think that Saudi Arabia is used to a slower pace. That being said, the Crown Prince does have a large youth backing.
Mm-hmm.
The other members of the family are going to see that and say, hey, he has large approval. He could definitely diversify us like we would like to be, because we're smart businessmen. They are.
They are incredibly astute as businessmen.
They're massively successful. And they know they're looking at the economy and saying, hey, Venezuela's doing horrible, and they're all oil. Maybe we should diversify. So, and I'm betting in about 13 years, which is the 2030 mark, you're going to see Saudi Arabia being extremely diverse.
I think that Mohammed bin Salman hopes that you're right.
I bet his father does too.
Hey guys, come on the show sometime.
Oh,
we'll have you.
We're going to have to talk about that because I don't want to be arrested. Anyway, well, that's all that's on the mind for me.
Same for me.
If you like the video, please like it. If you want to comment and tell us why we're wrong, go ahead. Duncan will prove you wrong mathematically.
You don't know that.
You probably could. If you're a member of the royal family of Saudi Arabia, please don't take any offense. We're just a couple of guys in America trying to make sense of the world. if you want to hear more from us, please subscribe. I'm sure Duncan would love to talk more, and I would too. And if Bryce, if he ever wants to materialize from his ghost form. So, anyway, that's all that's on the mind. Thanks for listening.
Have a great night.